The gunshot that rang out through the Golden Rose Saloon in Wood River, Nebraska, was not meant for killing, but it silenced the room just the same. Zelda Dawson froze mid-step, her worn dancing shoes planted on the wooden stage as every eye in the establishment turned toward the source of the sound. Marshall Henderson stood at the entrance, his revolver pointed at the ceiling, smoke curling from the barrel. It was June of 1882, and the summer heat had made everyone irritable, but this was something different. "That is enough," the marshal declared, his voice carrying the weight of authority that his silver badge represented. "This establishment is a disgrace to decent folk. Any woman caught dancing for money in this saloon will be fined and publicly named as a woman of ill repute." Zelda's heart hammered against her ribs as she felt the weight of judgment crash down upon her shoulders like a physical blow. She was 22 years old and had been dancing at the Golden Rose for 3 months, ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but debts and a small house that was falling apart. Dancing was honest work as far as she was concerned. She wore a modest dress, kept her movements respectable, and never did anything that would shame her father's memory. But the town's Women's Temperance Society had been pushing for months to shut down the saloon entirely, and this seemed to be their first victory. "Marshall, these girls are just trying to earn a living," protested Samuel Burke, the saloon owner, a portly man with a handlebar mustache that drooped with his current frown. "They are not doing anything illegal." "The law says otherwise as of yesterday," Marshall Henderson replied, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Town council passed it unanimous. No more dancing girls, no more entertainment that might corrupt the moral fiber of Wood River." Zelda felt her face burn with humiliation as the patrons began to murmur among themselves. Some looked sympathetic, but others wore expressions of righteous satisfaction. Mrs. Abigail Patterson, the head of the Temperance Society, stood near the bar with her arms crossed over her ample bosom, her thin lips pressed into a line of triumph. Zelda had known the woman her entire life, had sat in the same church pew every Sunday, but now she was being looked at as though she were something shameful and dirty. "Get down from there, girl," the marshal said, his tone slightly gentler now but no less firm. "Consider this your warning. I will not be so kind next time." Zelda gathered her skirts and descended the 3 steps from the stage, her legs trembling. The piano player, old Willie Carson, gave her an apologetic look but said nothing. No one spoke up for her. No one dared challenge the marshal or the town council, or the self-righteous women who had decided that a young woman trying to survive was somehow a threat to their comfortable lives. She was halfway to the back door, desperate to escape the stares and whispers, when a voice rang out clear and strong. "Hold on just a minute." The crowd parted as a man stepped forward from where he had been leaning against the far wall, a glass of whiskey forgotten in his hand. Zelda had noticed him earlier because he was new in town, a cowboy by the look of him, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore dusty trail clothes and a black hat that had seen better days, and there was something in the way he carried himself that spoke of a man who was not easily pushed around. "Who are you?" Marshall Henderson demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun belt. "Name is Grant Anderson," the cowboy said, setting his glass down on the nearest table with a deliberate calmness. "I have been working the cattle drives from Texas up through Kansas and Nebraska for the past 6 years. Just passing through your town, but I could not help but notice the injustice happening here." "There is no injustice," Mrs. Patterson interjected, her voice sharp. "We are protecting the moral standards of our community." Grant turned his gray eyes on her, and though his expression remained neutral, There was something in his gaze that made the woman take a small step backward. "Madam, I have seen real immorality in my travels. I have seen men beat their wives, cheat honest workers, and steal from those who have nothing. This young woman was dancing, just dancing. If that is what you consider the greatest threat to your town, then you are fortunate indeed. How dare you, Mrs. Patterson sputtered, her face turning an unbecoming shade of red. Grant ignored her and turned to face Zelda directly. His eyes softened as they met hers, and she felt something shift in her chest, a strange flutter that had nothing to do with fear or humiliation. "Miss, would you do me the honor of dancing with me? Right here, right now. I do not care what they think." The saloon erupted into shocked murmurs. Zelda stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. This stranger, this cowboy who owed her nothing and had everything to lose by defying the marshal and the town council, was asking her to dance. "Sir, I just explained that dancing is now prohibited," Marshal Henderson said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "You said women could not dance for money in the saloon," Grant replied, his tone reasonable but unyielding. "You said nothing about a gentleman asking a lady to dance with him socially. Unless Wood River has outlawed all dancing, in which case you had better arrest everyone who attended the church social last month." The marshal's jaw tightened, but he could not argue with the logic. The law, hastily written as it was, only prohibited the employment of dancing girls in saloons. It said nothing about patrons dancing together. Grant extended his hand toward Zelda, his calloused palm open and steady. "What do you say, miss? Will you dance with me?" Zelda's mind raced. Every instinct told her to run, to escape this humiliating situation and hide in her small house until the gossip died down. But something in Grant Anderson's eyes made her pause. He was offering her more than a dance. He was offering her dignity, the chance to hold her head high despite the judgment of people who had known her all her life but were willing to condemn her for trying to survive. "Yes," she heard herself say, and she placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he led her back toward the center of the room. The crowd fell silent, watching with a mixture of shock, disapproval, and fascination. Grant turned to Willie at the piano. "Do you know any waltzes?" Willie, fighting back a grin, nodded and began to play a slow, beautiful melody that Zelda recognized from her childhood. Her mother had loved this song. Grant placed one hand at her waist, holding her other hand in his, and began to lead her through the steps of the waltz. Zelda had danced countless times on the small stage, but this was different. This was intimate and personal in a way that made her breath catch. Grant moved with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback and his nights sleeping under the stars. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "You have nothing to thank me for," he replied, his voice low and meant only for her ears. "And nothing to be ashamed of. You were working honestly, and that is more than most people can say. You do not even know me." "I know enough," Grant said, and there was something in his tone that made her believe him. "I know that you were up on that stage with your head held high until small-minded people tried to take that away from you. I know that it takes courage to stand in front of a crowd and make your own way in the world. My mother did the same after my father died. She took in laundry, mended clothes, did whatever she had to do to keep my sisters and me fed. Some people looked down on her for it, but she was the strongest person I ever knew." Zelda felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Where is she now?" "Died 2 years ago," Grant said, and there was a shadow of old grief in his voice. "Pneumonia took her one winter. But she lived to see my sisters married and settled, and she died knowing that we all turned out all right. She would have liked you, I think." They danced in silence for a moment, and Zelda became aware that the atmosphere in the saloon was shifting. Some of the patrons who had been watching with disapproval now wore expressions of grudging respect. Even Marshal Henderson had lowered his hand from his gun belt, though he still looked far from pleased. Mrs. Patterson, however, was furious. "This is an outrage," she declared, her voice shrill. "Marshal, are you going to allow this?" "He is not breaking any law," the marshal admitted reluctantly. "Though I would advise both of you to keep in mind that Wood River is a respectable town." "The most respectable people I have ever known were not the ones who spent their time judging others," Grant said, without missing a step in the dance. "They were the ones who showed kindness and gave second chances." The waltz came to an end, and Grant released Zelda slowly, as though reluctant to let her go. The saloon remained silent for a long moment, and then a few people began to applaud. It started with one of the ranch hands in the corner, then spread to a few others, until about half the room was clapping. The other half looked scandalized, but Zelda did not care. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like someone saw her as more than a burden or a problem to be solved. "I should go," she said quietly, though part of her wanted to stay in this moment forever. "May I walk you home?" Grant asked. "It is getting dark, and I would feel better knowing you arrived safely." Zelda hesitated, aware of how it would look to have this stranger escort her through town, but she found that she did not care any more what people thought. "I would like that." They left the saloon together, stepping out into the warm evening air. Wood River was a small town, with one main street lined with false-fronted buildings and a few side streets where most of the residents lived. The sun was setting behind the distant horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for such a difficult day. "I live just down this way," Zelda said, pointing toward a street that led away from the center of town. "It is not far." They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, their footsteps echoing on the wooden boardwalk. Zelda was intensely aware of Grant's presence beside her, tall and solid and reassuring in a way she had not expected. "How long will you be in Wood River?" She found herself asking, then immediately wished she had not. It sounded too much like she cared whether he stayed or left. "I was planning to move on tomorrow," Grant admitted. "I have been working a ranch down in Kansas, but the owner sold out to a bigger outfit. I have been thinking about trying to find a place of my own, somewhere I could settle down and build something permanent. I am tired of drifting." "That sounds like a good plan," Zelda said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "But I find myself reconsidering," Grant continued, and there was something in his tone that made her look up at him. "Wood River seems like it might be a decent town, despite this evening's events, and I hear there is good grazing land available not too far from here." Zelda's heart began to beat faster, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "You would stay here, even after what happened tonight, especially after what happened tonight," Grant said firmly. "I met someone worth staying for." They had reached her house, a small structure that desperately needed a new coat of paint and several repairs to the roof. Zelda felt a flush of embarrassment at how shabby it looked, but Grant did not seem to notice or care. "This is me," she said unnecessarily. Grant removed his hat, holding it in his hands as he looked down at her. In the fading light, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes were clear and earnest. "Miss Dawson, I know we just met, and I know this is forward of me, but I would very much like to call on you properly. If you would allow it." Zelda's breath caught in her throat. She had been courted before by a few young men in town, but none of them had made her feel the way Grant Anderson did. None of them had stood up for her when it mattered, had offered her his hand when everyone else was turning away. "I would like that very much," she said softly. But you should know that after tonight, my reputation in this town is going to be even worse than it was. People will talk." "Let them talk," Grant said with a slight smile. "I have never put much stock in gossip. I prefer to judge people by their actions, and your actions tell me you are a woman of strength and courage. That is all I need to know." He reached out and gently touched her hand, just a brief contact, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "May I come by tomorrow? Perhaps we could take a walk, get to know each other better." "Yes," Zelda agreed, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I would like that." Grant replaced his hat and tipped it to her in farewell. "Good night, Miss Dawson. Sleep well." "Good night, Mr. Anderson." She watched him walk back toward town, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the gathering darkness, and then she went inside her small house. It was sparsely furnished and showing its age, but tonight it felt different somehow. Tonight it felt like a place where hope might live again. The next morning, Zelda woke earlier than usual, her mind already on the coming day. She chose her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and spent extra time braiding her dark hair and pinning it up neatly. She cleaned her already clean house, more out of nervous energy than necessity, and tried not to watch the clock on her mantel too closely. Grant arrived just after noon, looking freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, though they were still the practical garments of a working cowboy. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked from the prairie surrounding the town. "For you," he said, offering them with an endearing touch of uncertainty, as though worried she might not accept them. "They are beautiful," Zelda said, taking the flowers and breathing in their sweet scent. "Let me put them in water and then we can take that walk." They strolled through Wood River together, and though Zelda was aware of the stares and whispers that followed them, she found that Grant's presence made them easier to bear. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her stories about his life on the cattle drives, the places he had seen, the people he had met. He had a way of describing things that made her feel like she was there with him, seeing the vast prairies and distant mountains, hearing the thunder of thousands of hooves and the lonely call of coyotes at night. "It sounds like an adventure," she said wistfully. "I have lived in Wood River my entire life. The farthest I have ever been is to Kearney, and that was only once when I was a child." "Maybe someday you will see more of the world," Grant said. "It is a big country out there, full of beautiful things. But I am learning that a beautiful place does not mean much if you do not have someone to share it with." They walked down to the creek that ran along the edge of town, following a narrow path through the cottonwood trees. It was cooler here, shaded from the bright summer sun, and the sound of water flowing over rocks was peaceful and soothing. "Tell me about your father," Grant said gently as they sat down on a fallen log near the water's edge. "If you do not mind talking about it." Zelda was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "He was a good man," she said finally. "He worked as a blacksmith and he was skilled at his trade. But he got sick last winter, and by the time we realized it was serious, there was nothing the doctor could do. He died in March." "I am sorry," Grant said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "He left debts," Zelda continued, needing to say it all now that she had started. "The medicine, the doctor's fees, and some loans he had taken out to keep the smithy running when business was slow. I sold almost everything we had to pay them off, but it was not enough. That is when I started dancing at the Golden Rose. Samuel Burke was kind enough to give me the work, and the money was helping me keep the house and buy food. Until last night." "What will you do now?" Grant asked. "I do not know," Zelda admitted, feeling the weight of her uncertainty pressing down on her. "I can sew and I am a decent cook, but there are not many positions available in a town this size. Mrs. Henderson needs help with her laundry, and I have been doing that, but it does not pay much." Grant was quiet for a long moment, staring at the creek as it flowed past them. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I went to see about that land this morning, the grazing land I mentioned. There is a parcel about 5 miles from here, good grass and water, with a small cabin already built on it. The man who owns it wants to sell because he is moving back east to be with his daughter. The price is fair." Zelda's heart sank a little. She was happy for him, truly, but the thought of him settling so far from town meant she would see him less often. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity." "It is," Grant agreed. "But a ranch, even a small one, is a lot of work for one man. I would need help, especially at the beginning. I was thinking I might need to hire someone, or perhaps find a partner." He turned to look at her then, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Miss Dawson, Zelda, I know we have only just met, and I know this is going to sound crazy, but I feel like I have known you longer than a day. When I saw you up on that stage, and then saw how those people treated you, something in me just knew. You are strong and brave, and you deserve better than what this town is giving you." "What are you saying?" Zelda asked, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I am saying that I would like to court you properly. Take the time to do this right," Grant said, his words coming faster now as though he was afraid he might lose his courage. "But I am also saying that if, in time, you felt the same way I do, I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife. We could build that ranch together, make it into something real and lasting. You would never have to worry about money or what people think again. I would take care of you, and I would be proud to do it." Zelda stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. It was too much, too fast, too wonderful to be real. "Grant, we barely know each other." "I know," he said, and she could see the vulnerability in his expression. "That is why I am not asking you to give me an answer now. I am asking you to give me a chance to prove myself to you, to show you that I mean what I say. Court you proper, spend time together and see where it leads. If you decide I am not the right man for you, I will accept that and wish you well. But if you think there might be something between us worth exploring, then I am asking you to be brave one more time." Zelda's mind was spinning. Every practical thought told her that this was foolish, that she should not trust a man she had just met, that she should be cautious and sensible. But her heart was telling her something entirely different. Her heart was telling her that Grant Anderson was exactly the kind of man her father would have wanted for her, someone honest and hardworking and kind, someone who saw her value when others saw only shame. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I would like that. I would like to see where this leads." The smile that spread across Grant's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He reached out and took her hand in his, holding it gently as though it were something precious. "Thank you. You will not regret this. I promise you that." They sat by the creek for another hour, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods and their dreams for the future. Zelda learned that Grant was 26 years old, that he had 2 younger sisters who were now married and living in Kansas, and that his favorite meal was beef stew with fresh baked bread. He learned that she loved to read, but had sold most of her books to pay her father's debts, that she had always wanted to see the ocean but had never been farther east than the Nebraska prairie, and that she could speak a little bit of German because her grandmother had taught her. The afternoon faded into evening, and reluctantly they made their way back toward town. When they reached Zelda's house, Grant lingered at the gate, clearly not wanting the day to end. "May I see you again tomorrow?" he asked. "I would be disappointed if you did not," Zelda replied with a smile. Over the following weeks, Grant became a constant presence in Zelda's life. He visited her every day, sometimes taking her for walks, sometimes helping her with repairs around her small house that she had been unable to manage on her own. He fixed her roof, replaced broken boards on her porch, and reinforced her front door so that it hung straight in its frame. All the while, they talked and laughed and grew to know each other in the way that really mattered. Grant also went ahead with purchasing the land, and he invited Zelda to come see it with him. They rode out together in a wagon he had bought, and when they crested the final hill and the property came into view, Zelda caught her breath at the beauty of it. The cabin was small but sturdy, sitting on a gentle rise with a clear view of the surrounding prairie. A creek ran through one corner of the property, lined with trees that provided shade and shelter. In the distance, she could see a small herd of cattle that Grant had already purchased, grazing peacefully in the tall grass. "What do you think?" Grant asked, watching her face anxiously. "I think it is perfect," Zelda said honestly. "I can see why you wanted it. Can you see yourself here?" He asked quietly. "Living here, making a life here." Zelda turned to look at him, and the hope and love she saw in his eyes made her answer easy. "Yes, I can see that very clearly." Grant's face lit up, and he took both of her hands in his. "Zelda, I know we agreed to take our time, but I cannot wait any longer to ask you properly. I have fallen completely in love with you. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "Yes, Grant. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too." He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. A kiss full of promise and hope, and a future that suddenly seemed bright and full of possibility. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Wood River. It was a simple ceremony, attended by a few of Grant's new friends from the ranching community and a handful of people from town who had continued to support Zelda despite the scandal. Mrs. Patterson and her temperance society ladies were noticeably absent, but Zelda found that she did not care. She had everything she needed right there in that little church: a good man who loved her and a future full of promise. Samuel Burke attended, giving Zelda away since she had no family left to do it. The saloon owner had tears in his eyes as he placed her hand in Grant's, and he whispered, "Your father would be proud of you, girl. You found yourself a good one." Zelda and Grant moved into the cabin on their ranch, and they threw themselves into the work of building their life together. The days were long and hard, filled with the endless tasks that come with running a ranch, but Zelda had never been happier. She learned to ride properly, how to help with the cattle, and how to keep the household running smoothly even when supplies were scarce and the weather was uncooperative. Grant was everything he had promised to be and more. He was patient when she made mistakes, encouraging when she doubted herself, and unfailingly loving even on the days when they were both exhausted and covered in dust. He built her a bookshelf and slowly began to replace the volumes she had been forced to sell, searching for them in Kearney, and even sending away for some from back east. He surprised her with little gifts: wildflowers picked on his way home from checking the cattle, a new dress ordered from a catalog, a rocking chair he had made himself during the long winter evenings. In turn, Zelda made their small cabin into a real home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a garden that flourished under her care, and cooked meals that made Grant declare she was the best cook in all of Nebraska. She kept their accounts meticulously, saved money where she could, and proved to have a sharp head for business that complemented Grant's practical ranching skills. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There was a drought that summer that made them worry about the cattle and the crops. A pack of wolves killed 2 calves before Grant, and some neighboring ranchers managed to track them down. Zelda got sick with a fever that lasted for days and left Grant terrified that he might lose her. But they faced each challenge together, and each one they overcame made them stronger as a couple. They also faced the continued judgment of some people in Wood River. When Zelda went into town for supplies, there were still a few women who would cross the street to avoid speaking to her, who whispered behind their hands and made sure their daughters stayed away from the former saloon dancer. It hurt, but Grant's love and the growing circle of friends they had made in the ranching community helped ease the sting. One afternoon in their second year of marriage, Zelda was in the mercantile purchasing flour and sugar when Mrs. Patterson entered with 2 of her fellow Temperance Society members. The women immediately began whispering, shooting disapproving glances in Zelda's direction. Zelda tried to ignore them, focusing on her shopping, but Mrs. Patterson made a point of speaking loudly enough to be overheard. Some people may have fooled a decent man into marrying them, but that does not erase the shame of their past. Once a saloon girl, always a saloon girl. Something inside Zelda snapped. She had endured the whispers and the judgment for nearly 2 years, had held her tongue out of respect for Grant and their place in the community. But suddenly, she found that she was no longer willing to be silent. She turned to face Mrs. Patterson directly, her voice calm but firm. "Madam, I have never done anything to be ashamed of. I danced in that saloon because I needed to eat and keep a roof over my head after my father died. I worked honestly, harmed no one, and kept my dignity despite people like you trying to take it from me. I am proud of the woman I am, and I am proud of the life I have built with my husband. If you cannot see that, if you cannot find it in your heart to show a little Christian charity and forgiveness, then that is your failing, not mine." The mercantile had gone silent, every person in the store turning to watch the confrontation. Mrs. Patterson's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Before she could respond, the voice of Reverend Matthews, the minister who had married Zelda and Grant, spoke up from near the counter. "Mrs. Dawson is absolutely right. I have seen how hard she and her husband work, how generous they are with their neighbors, how faithful they are in their marriage and their faith. If we cannot welcome such people into our community with open hearts, then we have failed to live up to the very principles we claim to hold dear." A murmur of agreement ran through the store, and to Zelda's surprise, several people nodded their support. Mrs. Patterson, faced with unexpected resistance, gathered her skirts and swept out of the mercantile without another word, her companions hurrying after her. The storekeeper, Mr. Jameson, gave Zelda a respectful nod. "Well said, Mrs. Dawson. Long overdue, if you ask me." Zelda felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even realized she was carrying. She finished her shopping and headed home, eager to tell Grant what had happened. When she arrived at the ranch, she found him working in the barn, repairing a stall door. "You will not believe what happened in town," she said, and proceeded to tell him the whole story. Grant listened with a growing smile, and when she finished, he set down his tools and pulled her into his arms. "I am proud of you. You should never have had to defend yourself against such nonsense, but I am glad you finally spoke your mind. You are worth 10 of that woman." "I could not have done any of this without you," Zelda said, leaning into his embrace. "You gave me the strength to stand up for myself." "No," Grant said gently. "You always had that strength. I just helped you remember it." That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over their land, Zelda felt a sense of peace and contentment that she had never imagined possible during those dark days after her father's death. She had found not just a husband, but a true partner, someone who saw her for who she really was and loved her all the more for it. As their second year of marriage turned into their third, their ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more cattle, built a larger barn, and even hired a young man named Thomas to help with the heavy work. Their home became known in the area as a place of warmth and hospitality, where neighbors were always welcome and no one left hungry. In the spring of their third year together, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Grant one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. She need not have worried. His expression transformed from surprise to joy so quickly that it made her laugh, and he swept her up carefully, mindful now of the precious life she carried. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Zelda asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Grant said. "You have given me everything, Zelda. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda suffered from sickness in the early months and found the physical work of the ranch increasingly difficult as her belly grew. Grant was endlessly patient, taking on extra work himself and insisting that she rest whenever she needed to. He treated her like she was made of glass, which sometimes frustrated her, but more often made her laugh at his overly protective nature. In December of 1884, during a cold snap that froze the creek and covered the prairie in frost, Zelda went into labor. Grant rode like mad to fetch the midwife from town, Mrs. Miller, a kind woman who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly a full day, and there were moments when Grant feared they might lose both Zelda and the baby. But Zelda was strong, just as she had always been, and when the sun rose on a new day, the sound of a baby's cry filled their cabin. Grant rushed in from where he had been pacing on the porch, finding Zelda exhausted but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. "It is a boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Grant knelt beside the bed, looking down at the tiny, red-faced infant with a sense of awe that brought tears to his eyes. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Zelda. Thank you for this gift." They named him William, after Zelda's father, and he became the center of their world. Grant proved to be a devoted father, taking William with him around the ranch as soon as the boy was old enough to sit up, teaching him about the land and the cattle with infinite patience. Zelda watched them together and felt her heart swell with love for both of them. The town's attitude toward Zelda continued to soften over the years. As people saw the life she and Grant had built, the family they were raising, and the way they contributed to the community, even the most judgmental began to admit that perhaps they had been wrong to condemn her so harshly. Mrs. Patterson never apologized, but she stopped making pointed comments, and that was progress of a sort. When William was 2 years old, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Grant's mother. William was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from fetching diapers to singing her to sleep. Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew healthy and strong, the cattle herd increased, and Grant and Zelda's reputation as fair dealers and good neighbors spread throughout the county. They added onto the cabin, building 2 additional bedrooms and a proper dining room where they could host the gatherings that had become regular events at their ranch. Grant often thought back to that night in the Golden Rose Saloon, the night he had first seen Zelda and known instinctively that she was special. He had taken a chance, standing up for a woman he did not know, defying the judgment of an entire town. It had been one of the best decisions of his life. Zelda, too, often reflected on how much her life had changed. In her darkest moments after her father's death, she had wondered if she would ever know happiness again, if she was destined to struggle alone forever. Then Grant Anderson had walked into the saloon, offered her his hand, and changed everything. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant surprised Zelda with a trip to Kearney, arranging for Mrs. Miller to watch William and Clara for a few days. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their honeymoon, and they enjoyed the novelty of sleeping in a real hotel and eating meals they had not prepared themselves. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked one evening as they walked along the main street of Kearney, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "Marrying me, giving up your life in town for the ranch." Zelda stopped walking and turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest. "Grant Anderson, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You saved me in that saloon, not just from the shame they were trying to put on me, but from a future alone and afraid. You gave me love, a home, a family, and a purpose. How could I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Grant said, covering her hands with his own. "I am more than happy," Zelda assured him. "I am content, fulfilled, and more in love with you now than I was the day we married. Every year that passes, I love you more." Grant kissed her then, right there on the street in the fading evening light, not caring who might see or what they might think. That was the beauty of what they had built together. They had learned that the opinions of others mattered far less than the love and respect they had for each other. They returned to the ranch refreshed and renewed, throwing themselves back into the work and the joy of raising their children. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the cattle as much as his father did. Clara was more adventurous, always exploring and asking questions, keeping both her parents on their toes. As the years passed, Grant and Zelda became pillars of their community. They helped neighbors during hard times, opened their home to travelers who needed a place to stay, and raised their children with the values of hard work, kindness, and standing up for what was right. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the county. When William was 15 and Clara was 13, Zelda became pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. She was 40 years old by then and had assumed her childbearing days were behind her. But Grant was thrilled, and the children were excited about having a new brother or sister. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, and there were complications that worried both the midwife and the doctor they brought in from Kearney. But Zelda had survived too much to be defeated now, and in the spring of 1900, she gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Grace. Grace was a miracle baby, born at the turn of a new century, and she seemed to embody hope and new beginnings. William and Clara doted on their baby sister, and Grant treated her like the precious gift she was. Zelda recovered slowly from the difficult birth, but with Grant's constant care and the help of her older children, she regained her strength. The new century brought changes to Nebraska and to Wood River. The town grew, new businesses opened, and the railroad expanded its routes, bringing more people and more opportunities. The harsh judgment and rigid morality of earlier decades began to soften as the world moved forward. Grant expanded their ranch operations, buying additional land and increasing their herd, until they were one of the largest suppliers of beef in the region. He took William into full partnership when the boy turned 21, recognizing that his son had both the skills and the passion to help run the operation. Clara, to everyone's surprise, showed a talent for business and took over managing the ranch's accounts and sales, proving herself to be shrewd and capable. Young Grace grew up on the ranch, learning to ride almost before she could walk, fearless and full of joy. Watching her, Zelda often thought about how different her life might have been if Grant had not walked into that saloon on that fateful June evening in 1882. She might have lost her house, been driven out of Wood River by shame and poverty, might never have known what it was to be truly loved and valued. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole community came together to celebrate at the ranch. Neighbors, friends, business associates, and even some of the people who had once judged Zelda so harshly gathered to honor the couple who had become such an important part of the fabric of the county. Tables laden with food stretched across the yard, musicians played cheerful tunes, and children ran and played in the golden summer evening. Reverend Matthews, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, stood to give a toast. 25 years ago, I married Grant and Zelda Anderson in our little church. Some people had doubts about that union, thought it was too quick, worried about scandal. But I saw then what everyone here sees now. These two people were meant for each other. They have built not just a successful ranch, but a true partnership, a family filled with love, and a legacy that will endure for generations. They have shown us all what it means to stand by your convictions, to see the worth in people that others might overlook, and to build something lasting on a foundation of love and respect. We are all better for having them as our neighbors and friends. The crowd erupted in applause, and Zelda felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. Grant put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, and they looked out at the gathering of people who had become their extended family. "We did all right, did we not?" Grant murmured in her ear. "We did better than all right," Zelda replied. "We did wonderfully." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children had retired to their rooms, Grant and Zelda sat together on their porch, just as they had done countless times over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead and the prairie stretched out before them, peaceful and eternal. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Zelda asked. "In the saloon, when you asked me to dance. Dance with me, I do not care what they think," Grant quoted, smiling at the memory. It seemed important at the time to make that clear. "It was the bravest thing anyone had ever done for me," Zelda said. "You gave me back my dignity when everyone else was trying to take it away. You saw me, the real me, not what others wanted to make me into. I saw a strong, beautiful woman who was doing her best in difficult circumstances," Grant said. "I saw someone worth fighting for, worth building a life with, and I was right. You have exceeded every hope I had that night. You are an amazing wife, mother, partner, and friend. I thank God every day that I walked into that saloon when I did." Zelda turned to kiss him, a kiss that held all the love and gratitude and joy of their years together. "I love you, Grant Anderson. Thank you for not caring what they thought. Thank you for choosing me." "Choosing you was the easiest decision I ever made," Grant replied. "And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." As the years continued to roll by, Grant and Zelda grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by their children and eventually their grandchildren. William married a local girl and brought her to live on the ranch, building his own house on the property. Clara surprised everyone by falling in love with a lawyer from Kearney, but she and her husband visited often and eventually moved back to Wood River when he established a practice there. Grace, the youngest, inherited her mother's strength and her father's determination, becoming a teacher and dedicating herself to educating the next generation. The original cabin where Grant and Zelda had started their life together was preserved, turned into a kind of shrine to their early days. They would sometimes walk down there on warm evenings, remembering how it had been when they were young and just starting out, when every day was a challenge and every victory was sweet. Grant's health began to fail when he was in his 70s. his body finally giving in to decades of hard physical labor. Zelda nursed him with the same devotion he had always shown her, refusing to let anyone else take over his care. He died peacefully one morning in their bed, Zelda holding his hand. His children and grandchildren gathered around to say goodbye. "I will see you again," Zelda whispered to him as his breathing slowed. "Wait for me on the other side, my love. We will dance together again." Grant's last words were her name, spoken with love and gratitude, and then he was gone. Zelda lived for 5 more years after Grant's death, staying on the ranch that they had built together, tended by her children and enjoying her grandchildren. She spoke often of Grant, keeping his memory alive with stories of their early days, of how he had stood up for her when no one else would, of how he had loved her with a devotion that never wavered. On a warm June evening in 1920, 38 years almost to the day after that fateful night in the Golden Rose Saloon, Zelda passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Grant in the small cemetery on their ranch, under a shared headstone that reads simply, "Grant and Zelda Anderson, they built a life on love." Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch, passing it down through generations, each one hearing the story of how it all began. The story of a young woman shamed for trying to survive, and a cowboy who saw her worth and was brave enough to say that he did not care what others thought. It became a family legend, a reminder that true love means standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult, and that the most important opinion is the one we hold of ourselves. The Golden Rose Saloon closed down in 1905, converted into a general store, but old-timers still remembered the night Grant Anderson asked Zelda Dawson to dance, the night that changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. It became one of those stories that people told when they wanted to illustrate the power of courage, the importance of seeing beyond surface judgments, and the enduring strength of love. In Wood River, as the decades passed and the world changed around it, the name Anderson remained synonymous with integrity, hard work, and devotion. The ranch that Grant and Zelda had started with nothing but hope and determination grew into one of the largest and most respected operations in Nebraska. Their descendants continued to embody the values they had lived by, treating people with fairness and respect, standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves, and building their lives on foundations of love and mutual support. The story of Grant and Zelda Anderson became more than just family history. It became part of the fabric of Wood River itself, a reminder that people can change, that communities can grow beyond their prejudices, and that sometimes the most important moments in life come when someone has the courage to extend a hand and say, "I do not care what they think. I see your worth, and that is all that matters." And so their legacy lived on, not just in the land they had tended or the children they had raised, but in the example they had set. An example of what it means to love truly, to stand firmly, and to build a life based not on the opinions of others but on the strength of character and the power of devotion. Their story became a testament to the idea that one moment of courage, one decision to do what is right rather than what is expected, can change everything. The ranch still stands today, operated by their great-great-grandchildren, and visitors who come there can still see the original cabin, preserved as it was when Grant and Zelda first made it their home. They can walk the same paths the couple walked, look out over the same prairie they loved, and feel the presence of something enduring and true. Because in the end, that is what Grant and Zelda Anderson gave to the world. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but proof that love can overcome judgment, that courage can defeat shame, and that two people who choose each other, who stand together against the world if necessary, can build something that lasts far beyond their own lives. They proved that one dance, offered at the right moment with the right heart, can change everything. And that legacy, that beautiful, enduring legacy, is the greatest gift they left behind.